Okay, now on to introducing our honored guests. In absentia for now, but hopefully we will see the Congresswoman soon. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty is a native Ohioan who has represented Ohio's 3rd Congressional District since 2013. She sits on the House Committee on Financial Services and serves on 3 of its subcommittees. As chair on the Financial Services Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion, Beatty leads efforts to ensure the financial service industry works better for all Americans. Prior to her service in the U.S. House, the Congresswoman was Senior Vice President of Outreach and Engagement at The Ohio State University and a member of the Ohio House of Representatives for 5 terms, where she rose to become the first female Democratic House leader in Ohio's history. Congresswoman Beatty is Vice Chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, a regional whip, and Deputy Vice Chair of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus. Outside of her committee and numerous caucus memberships, Beatty is a committed and vocal supporter of early education, women's equality, and the Office of Minority and Women's Inclusion. She has been named one of Ebony Magazine's 150 most powerful African Americans in the United States. Welcome, Congresswoman. Dr. Derek Hamilton is an internationally recognized scholar in the field of stratification economics, which uses social science methods to examine the causes and consequences and remedies of racial, gender, ethnic, tribal, and other forms of inequality in education, economic, and health outcomes. This work involves crafting innovative policies to break down social hierarchy, empower people, and move society towards greater equity, inclusion, and civic participation. Congressman Ro Khanna of California has characterized Hamilton as having had, quote, a profound impact on policymakers and called him, quote, an intellectual giant of his time. Professor Hamilton was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He's a graduate of Oberlin College and earned his PhD from the University of North Carolina. He completed postdoctoral appointments at the University of Michigan and Yale and became director of the Kirwan Institute here at OSU in 2019. He was also a national surrogate for Senator Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. We are so proud and grateful to have you both here for today's conversation. Like so much of the country, our OSU community has been trying to come to terms with the extent of systemic racism in our society, especially in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We have in our audience today many viewers from the OSU community, but also the broader public as well, who are really looking forward for information and inspiration on how to take the next steps towards progress, both as individuals and as parts of institutions and organizations. Because of their leadership and focus on issues of racial equity, as well as their deep ties to Ohio, we could not have 2 more well-positioned guests to help us with this task. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Hamilton for a few opening remarks.
Well, first, gratitude. Thank you for hosting this event. I am looking forward and hope it works out that I can share the stage with Congresswoman Beatty. She is a leader in this domain. And in my time back in Ohio, it's been a great pleasure to see her at multiple events and get to know her better. And I really hope this works out. I was looking forward to this engaged conversation. But let me set the stage a little bit from my perspective. The national and international outrage from the infamous video of George Floyd being killed in broad daylight by law enforcement officers for an approximately 10-minute period with a knee in his neck while he screamed for mercy that he can't breathe is a clear indication of the ways in which his life was devalued because of his race. It was because of his race that his life was devalued. This links to a larger economic and political vulnerability, whether we're in a COVID pandemic or not. The public response to poverty and economic insecurity in general is very racialized. It fits into a narrative of who is deserving and not deserving in our society. And that in turn impacts our fiscal response and how we're able to deal with a pandemic or any other type of poverty or inequality or economic vulnerability. We can say with certainty that the pandemic is resulting in greater inequality and despair, particularly along racial lines. However, it's also noteworthy that our government can act to change this reality. The paramount indicator of economic well-being should begin with our health. And if we look at racial differences in infection and mortality related to COVID-19, those disparities are dramatic. that the impact of something presumably random, like a pandemic, however catastrophic, can be linked to one's racial identity, that's a problem. And it's also indicative of a nation that's failing miserably in our response. The only way an increase in inequality does not occur as a result of this pandemic is if we are able to change the political economy towards the implementation of long-term structural policy, and as well as addressing the immediate crises that we face, so as that we'll be more resilient the next time a pandemic hits or any other type of economic downturn. We do not have an adequate social safety net in place. What we have is decades of deregulation, lower taxes for the wealthy, and a gutting of government services and social welfare programs. This has resulted in, over the last 45 years, essentially all the economic gains from our increasing productivity going to the elite and upper middle class, while real worker wages remain stagnant. This manifests in a concentration of power where the top 0.1% of the population, those earning above $1.5 million, have as much wealth as the entire bottom 90% of earners in our country. That's an obscene concentration of wealth, especially by race, as well as an accompanying plutocracy that comes along with that. It's undemocratic, it's dysfunctional, and it's a distorted depiction of both power and material well-being. This long trend is the result of a radical investment in neoliberalism and free markets with an emphasis on, as I mentioned, deregulation and tax cuts. The neoliberal frame has shifted our public discourse so that we explain poverty and inequality as deficiencies internal to the poor and Blacks themselves. In other words, we use race, stigmatization based on race, as an anti-Black strategic mechanism, political fodder, in order to implement harsh and punitive control on the underclass. Black people become the symbolism of an undeserving welfare queen, deadbeat dad, super predator. It's what we can characterize as surplus populations. They're characterized as persistently unemployed, unemployable, a source of urban crime and malice, and whose subsistence needs we deem a drain on fiscal budgets. What's wrong with that narrative and what's glaringly missing from that narrative is the role of power and capital in the first place, and how power and capital can be used to influence transaction in the first place. What we have is a moral responsibility to contest this empirically unsubstantiated rhetoric that centers inequality as deficiencies amongst the subaltern themselves. Instead, we need to conduct informed, bold, scholarly, as well as journalistic work, and advocate for programs and initiatives that truly empower people with the resources that they need to strive, with economic security, with dignity, and with agency. The good news is that change may be happening. Black Lives Matter and along with the ongoing civil protests that have taken place across all 50 of our states and pretty much across the world, these are all examples of how younger generations and social movements are redefining what economic good is defined as in order to incorporate principles of dignity, our common humanity, sustainability, and emphasize a shared prosperity. People are starting to demand economic rights, where we have public options that directly compete with and crowd out inferior private options that do not ensure universal and quality health care, quality housing, schooling, financial services, capital, and the free mobility without the psychological and physical threat of detention or bodily harm at the hands of a state-sanctioned terror because someone's identity is vulnerable and linked to a stigmatized group. So with the COVID-19 pandemic occurring at the same time of the George Floyd video circulating, at this time, we also have 40 million Americans who've applied for unemployment. And in this same moment, we have a president that is gaslighting with more and more divisive venom. Is this our Overton moment? That's the question for me, for all of us. And I think the answer is at least for me personally, is I don't know, but I hope so. But regardless, I think we all need to be committed to justice, and committed to justice as a matter of faith, because it's the right thing to do. Personally, I'm undeterred by what people think is possible and not possible based on the politics of a here and now, or a politics of our immediate past, which has been dominated by economic consolidation and plutocracy. What I do know is that despair and cynicism feed into a plutocratic status quo, and I believe in our shared prosperity. It is our economy, it is our money, and it is our government. The ultimate answer to change for a society that we desire and need is that it will occur when we all seize upon it.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks, Dr. Hamilton. I apologize, folks. We're still working on getting the Congresswoman involved, and we're still hopeful that she'll be able to join us for the second half of the discussion today. I was going to lead by asking the Congresswoman a question, but under the circumstances, I will switch things up a little bit. Dr. Hamilton, in the public discussion about race and law enforcement, what do you think are the key misconceptions among opponents of reform? Or do you think the main challenge is not so much misconceptions, but people simply not wanting to give up their power and privilege? Do you worry about any potential blind spots among proponents of reform? Is there anything that people who are pushing reform might be missing from those who are sometimes critical of reform efforts?
Yeah, and I guess given that we're shifting format a little bit, I'll make a suggestion that I know you've thought about a lot of these issues as well, so feel free to, we can have a conversation where you commented back and forwards also. I think it's both. I think for one misconception is, you know, we hear movements like, we hear defund the police. And people are like, well, what does that mean? I'm interpreting what it means as basically continuing to put money into a system that has some fundamental flaws is problematic. That is my understanding and interpretation of what is meant by defund the police. What it doesn't mean is that people abdicate a need for the state to provide tolerable security. I don't think anybody says that we should be an insecure population. But what is also problematic is that thinking that we can funnel money into a system that has not been dramatically reformed and has indicated repeatedly over and over again, and we've also been here before. So to continue to think that we can offer a training here or there and that's going to solve our problem, that's misplaced. I think that's the point. And then the larger question about is it something more than just misconception? And that leads to the point of, well, is the system set up as an accident, or are there some intentionality by which the system is set up? And what I was trying to allude to earlier is that the ways in which we manage surplus populations is often with things like punitive control, things like mass incarceration. So one mechanism by which we can maintain a structure that actually leads to a consolidation at the top of both economic and political power is kind of what I alluded to by one, creating scapegoats, but two, also creating relative positioning. So if we have a society with growing inequality, one way to maintain political control is to convince a dominant population that however bad you may be or however worse off you may be, at least you're not Black or at least you're not Mexican. And the use of violence has historically and in a contemporary way been a mechanism by which you can create these divisions within our society.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I see that it appears that the Congresswoman at least has an audio feed, is that right?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Oh, I'm so pleased.
I am so sorry about this, and Amy is being wonderful in trying to get me in. The good news is I could hear everything that Dr. Hamilton was saying as well as you. Dr. Nablo, and it is, let me just say, ditto. I agree to everything that he said. I don't know if you want me to continue while we are still trying to figure out why it is not letting me be seen. So you just have to let me know. Do you want us to continue if you can hear me?
Yes, I think that that's the way to go, Congresswoman. Most of the people in the audience did not come to listen to me. They came to listen to you and Dr. Hamilton, and it would be better if we were able to see you, but just hearing your voice, I'm very grateful. And I'm very grateful for your time and your thoughtful leadership over the last many years, but especially over these last few months. I'm going to suggest that if you'd like, we might even be getting video here. I was going to suggest that I was going to offer just a couple of minutes for some opening remarks, but ask that you keep.
Why don't we go to that? And then maybe we will be able to get me in. First of all, let me just say thank you to you, Dr. Nablo, for all of your work and for hosting this call. Certainly, I am always honored, whether I am on Zoom, Washington, D.C., or in Columbus, Ohio, to join my good friend, Dr. Derek Hamilton, for anything. So with that, George Floyd's life has inspired a movement for change that has spread across the country. And I think this town hall asks the right question. How do we ensure lasting change? Because this is not new to us. We are going from agony to action. Much of this is because of the protesting, which in part has led to much of the policy actions now taking place, not only here in our wonderful capital city of Ohio, but in the county, in the state, not only across the United States, but in the world. People are doing exactly what we are doing. I don't think there is any one right answer to the question you are asking us. But as a member of Congress, I can tell you that my job is to ensure lasting change by making sure we are enshrining changes into law. I also think we can learn from your recent book when you address politics with people. You will find that many times my office will write that Congresswoman Beatty likes connecting people to policies to politics. So based on that, I have introduced House Resolution 990 that designates racism a national crisis. And it calls on us to move forward for a truth and reconciliation process. Now, let me just say, we know that Black Americans face higher unemployment rates, a persistent wealth gap, more likely to die young from the lack of health care access, and far more likely to lose their lives at the hands of police. Now, that's not a Joyce Beatty statement or theory. This is based on data and statistics that show that we are disproportionately affected. Take the COVID-19. Take the healthcare pandemic we're in right now and look at the facts that I get every morning about the percentage of the population we make up in the county, in the state, in the nation. Now compare it to the number of people who have contracted this virus. Compare it to the number of deaths for Black folks. And it will answer the question for you to see how disproportionately we are represented. I am so proud of what we're doing in Congress. And I'll make a brief statement here and then as we go to the questions, but certainly we have taken some of the boldest ideas and concepts from the past. This is not new. Racism is not new. Having a police officer put his knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on George Floyd's neck, as horrific it has been, as painful as it's been, it is not new. It is not new. What happened is, I think we have had that perfect storm. You know, we saw what happened to Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, the no warrant, no knock warrant. We saw what happened to Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, shot down, a lynching. And so when you look at that, when you look at the healthcare pandemic, when you look at what didn't happen with the PPP, small businesses, Black businesses did in good faith, called their banks that they had a relationship with, then the rules changed. Oh, yes, you've been banking with us in Stellar, but you never took out a $500,000 loan with us. So now you don't qualify. We put the most money that we have ever put in the history of Congress, $2 trillion. We then put $350 billion in for small businesses. And what happens? In 14 days or less, the money's all gone. And those who needed it the most didn't even get in the queue for it. So when all of that hits, it has done just what George Floyd's little daughter said. So much wisdom, Dr. Hamilton, with the little children. She said, my daddy would change the world. As he held her on his shoulders, never thinking that the day would come that he would die like he did. And so when people say, why do we name it after George Floyd? Why do we call it the Justice in Policing Act named after him? Because indeed, it may be the only thing that will allow us to change the world. So there are so many good things in that bill, protecting civil rights by making it easier to bring criminal and civil cases against police misconduct, limiting the sale of military-grade equipment to police department. And I think it's so important that we strengthen the accountability and oversight for every person sworn to protect and serve everyone, thus our police officers. I don't need to say, obviously it starts with banning the chokehold and the no-knock warrants. And it also is going to mandate data collection, and also including body cameras and dashboard cameras. So we have many of the things that we have been talking about in the past in this bill. But beyond passing this bill, because certainly, as I have frequently said, you can't legislate away racism. You can't legislate common sense. Come on. If you are hired to protect me, you know that there are other ways that you can sedate me or you can hold me down when I'm already handcuffed, when I'm not resisting arrest. So that is just blatant racism or blatant use of force when it was not needed. We must get to really the root of the structural racism that has plagued our country for centuries. I mean, we can go back to Emmett Till. We can go back to slavery. 401 years ago, we brought people of color enslaved from their country here to slavery. I went to Ghana to talk to ancestors of those individuals. So I think what we have to do is realize that racism is a national crisis. I think we have to address it head on and without compromise. And then maybe, just maybe, we can start the dialogue to do many of the things that my good friend, Dr. Hamilton, has said in certainly a more scientific and academically stellar way. Bottom line, we've got to figure out how to move beyond the racism that we're dealing with. And so thank you, and I yield back.
Well, thank you. Given some of our technical issues here, I'm going to change things around a little bit and cut most of my questions. I asked Dr. Hamilton one question. I'm going to ask you, Congresswoman, one question, and then we'll turn it over to everyone in the audience. As some people in the audience might know, Congresswoman Beatty is the co-founder of the Civility and Respect Caucus, a really remarkable bipartisan group which pairs members from across the aisle to foster those values in politics. Now, Congresswoman, many of your colleagues opposed the new policing legislation and related reforms. So I have a couple of related questions. Do you find it challenging to maintain civility and respect in this particular case? And how do we distinguish between people who deny systemic racism from those who may just prefer different policy solutions to it? And are there any of your opponents' stated concerns about reform that you think might have merit?
Well, certain. So let me start with how I ended. I will always believe in practicing civility and respect. And I think I can look you in the eye and tell someone that I think that what they're practicing is racism, or even that they're racist, and be within the guides of being respectful and civility. Sometimes the facts are just the facts. Now, with that, I'm biased. So let me just tell you, I think everything in the bill and everything that's in my House Resolution 990 should go into law. If I was in charge of both sides, I'd do everything that Speaker Pelosi is doing, fighting for the people. And this is not just something that Black people are fighting for Black people. People of all races and ethnicity and age and self-identification have been out there marching for what's right for humanity and for human dignity, and that we don't go backwards. You know, many of us have witnessed firsthand, or through our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, or through the academic journals, of what has been real for people who look like me. And so how can we not compromise? We cannot compromise any of the things that are written to move us forward. Now, with that said, do you always get everything you want in politics? Absolutely not. So at some point we will come together, but I can tell you we will not be compromising what we have witnessed in recent and past years. So I ask people when they ask me that, you tell me what you would take out. So do we say no chokeholds? And so we can prevent some more George Floyds, but we say let them have the no-knock warrants and forget about what happened to a Breonna Taylor. Or do we say the justice, you should not be brought to justice because of how you felt, and then there goes Ahmaud Arbery. So I think everything that we have put in this legislation is something we believe in and we will stand up to. Now, is it easy? No. Do we have people that I go into on the House floor that have different views, visions, grew up different culturally? Absolutely. Now, with that, that's why we say that it is systemic. That's why we say it is something that we have to start with a culture change. You can't legislate away. I don't care what the rules are. We have rules on guns. And every day someone figures out how to get around those rules. Black people killing Black people, white people killing white people, and Black and white people killing each other. And so it takes more than just the legislation, but that is a start. And it will help save lives. But we also need to do more. And I still maintain, as hard as it is oftentimes for me to be respectful and to show civility, it doesn't mean that I am without passion or emotion or fight or drive. All of those things are still very much out there. When I see an injustice to someone else, it tells us that it's a threat to justice for everyone else that's out there. And that's why we have to fight, even though it may not in our minds directly affect us, it does. And that's why we have to advocate for what is in the bill. Now, I've got members that are going to stand up on the floor and say no. We have members who won't even put a mask on. And one member of Congress actually said, well, that's because my people are more healthier than your people. So I don't have to worry about getting COVID-19. So you know what my answer is? You also can't legislate or elect intelligence or legislate away ignorance. So as long as we have people who are not willing to change, we will have to fight harder. It will not be easy. I do think more that the glass is half full than half empty. I do think that people will come together and we will move the needle. I do think that the Senate has made attempts. I don't agree with them. I don't think it's enough, but I'm old enough and I've been around long enough to know sometimes when you start a fight, the people on the other side aren't willing to even come to the table. So I think what we will have to do is figure out through beyond Congress. That's why I like the protesting. That's why I like the people out there advocating and fighting for change. Because if you look at every change that we have had that has moved the needle towards having a better nation, having equality and justice for all, it's been a few good people that were committed and they got into a march or a protest or they stood up. Rosa Parks making a statement that she would get arrested and leave that bus before she would let that white man take her seat. What did that do? That introduced her to Martin Luther King. What did that do? 1 year, people walked without getting on a bus. It was that movement. John Lewis, who I sit with on the floor, the same thing. He was a young teenager, not necessarily agreeing with Martin Luther King when they first met, but he listened, he watched, and then he walked and then he marched. And look how many people followed them when they came together. And look at the changes that we were able to make. Think about Fannie Lou Hamer and how many times she had tried to get registered to vote. And then it moved the needle that people could. Now we're going backwards. We're going backwards in actuality. So that's kind of where I am. I will continue. No, everybody didn't like civility and respect, or we would have had everyone joining. Now, did we move the needle? Our first goal was to get 10 or 20, which means you had to have 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans working together. We got to over 50. Many people thought that would never happen. So there was progress. So you just can't give up. You know, you go back to the old saying that Jesse Jackson used to tell us, keep hope alive. You know, so we have to fall back on that. Barack Obama told us, you know, the audacity for hope and change. You know, so we have to have the courage and the strength to keep fighting.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to pivot now to questions from the audience. And I think this one could go to both of our guests. It's from Mary, who asks, what legislative initiatives could address the systems in place that continue to disproportionately affect Black and Brown people, and perhaps particularly at the state level, and in fighting systemic racism beyond what's next after the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act?
You want me to go first, or I'm happy to.
Why don't you go first and I'll follow.
So the federal government has greater capacity than state and localities, but politics begin at state and localities, and there's a lot that can be done at the state and local level. You know, at the very least, we can stop some of the disparate treatment. We could stop relying on fees and fines as mechanisms to balance budgets, in which you are oftentimes preying upon those that are most politically vulnerable, that don't have the capacity to stop the fees and fines being directed their way. Like, for instance, suspending somebody's driver's license as a result of a fine or a fee is criminalizing poverty. So there are things we can do first and foremost to stop some of the disparate treatment, but then we can go further. I think we can go further by trying to ultimately what I think of as a policy regime that we need to start shifting to. A lot of my comments in the beginning were critiquing the ways in which we've gone so far, at least for the last 45 years, and thinking that the problems of inequality rest with people, that somehow people are derelict or deficit in either their efforts or behaviors. I think what we need at local, state, and federal government, and again, as I mentioned, the federal government has the greatest agency because they control our money supply. What we need is policies that provide the economic resources so that people can thrive. So rather than thinking about disciplining people, we need to think about governments that are disciplined and disciplining the corporate sector so that so that people have some power in which they can engage in their everyday lives. And what does it mean to discipline the corporate sector? We need states to provide direct jobs. We need government jobs. There's nothing wrong with directly hiring people, not just to offer a job, a direct mechanism of employment, but jobs that are building our physical and human infrastructure, jobs that are improving our schools, jobs that are improving our roads, jobs that are basically building up all the capacity so that everybody in society can thrive.
Congresswoman, would you like to say a few words on that question?
Well, certainly being one of those that can be a driver at the federal level, I definitely agree with Dr. Hamilton. And I think it spills over into everything that we're talking about. We can't, even if we could fix the racism as it relates to unnecessary force with the police officers, if we only dealt with that in isolation, we have not taken care of the issue. And I think that's his point about when you criminalize something, when you take away something that allows people to move forward. I fought for many years at the state level when brothers and sisters got arrested for something, and then they went to jail to be rehabilitated. So we would not have the recidivism rate that we had. So let's say Sam goes to prison and he gets rehabilitated and he gets his barber's license. Then what do we, and then he comes back and he's working and trying to make a living so he can pay his child support, which he definitely should pay. Something happened that now people want to take away if you go to jail and do your time. So now, according to our system, you did something wrong, the court system found you guilty, you go to jail. Now we say you can no longer have a license when you get out. So now I went to jail for not paying my child support. I now can't hold the license because I do something. Why am I punishing you for being a barber and taking away your license? In some places, you can go do your time and come out and can't even vote. And then, thanks goodness to DNA, they find out that you were in jail for 12 or 15 or 30 years and you were the wrong person. And so somehow we have to separate continuing to punish people after they have fulfilled their obligation of repenting, and in many cases they come out a changed person. But because we turn our backs on them, some will survive, but many don't. So I think we have to look at how do we connect beyond politics. Even though I am an elected official and someone who gives back and works hard, I have no problem saying that I am an elected official, a public servant, or yes, a politician, because that would be the truth. But I think we have to make it beyond just us. And I think in some of your writings, Doc, you talk about how we have to put citizens have to get engaged. And that's when you get change. I would tell you that many of those people who are out there marching right now have never been into the halls of Congress, probably never been into city council, might not be able to tell you who their state rep is, but what they know is they're fighting for justice. And what they know is when they band together and say what they're saying, no justice, no peace. when they say what they're feeling and what they're out there day and night for, that's what got the attention. We've been writing legislation against racism and for reparations before I was born. But why are we getting attention that people in Germany and people in Brazil and people in France are saying George Floyd, that they are saying no justice, no peace? Because people have finally come together, and this is the time for us to capitalize on it. So I think we have to bring more people together. We have to stop just counting on elected officials only. And for me to be an elected official who works hard and believes in the fight, we need help. We need people like the two of you, people who are scholars and have read about it, to continue to write. But we need you to take the words off the pages as well. I'm gonna tell you, like, people get on politicians, we're not doing enough. Probably one of the best things out of the Zooms, more people are tuning in and listening and hearing than they would have gone to a library or text in either one of your names and read your books. Now it's more intriguing. So we need everybody to go a step further. When I saw medical doctors, thousands of them at The Ohio State University, taking a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and saying comfortably, Black Lives Matter, we have gotten the attention of the world. Let's not mess this up. Let's figure out how it's not just left up to elected officials or blaming you haven't done enough at the federal level. We need you all to do more. I'm going to conversely give it back. We need the young people. We need to be on the page. I was talking with the co-founders of Black Lives Matters yesterday. They've released their bill called the Breathe Act. That is bold and progressive. Now, my interpretation in some of the things that they're saying is right on target with what I've been saying. And so now we have people, whether you're to the far left or the far right, we need to figure out how to bring all this together to save lives and to bring justice. And I think we will get there. It won't be the perfect answer, but I believe it will be better than what we have today by all of us just being heard. Listening is not working because we've all played that telephone game where I listen to what you say, Dr. Hamilton, 5 people later, it comes out entire, not thousands later, 5 people later, it comes out a little different than how or what you say it. So I think we have to start saying it ourselves. And it's going to take all of us.
Thank you very much. I'm going to freelance here a little bit, actually at our time, and I want to be respectful of our distinguished guests who are extraordinarily busy people, but I'm going to float the possibility of maybe going an extra 10 minutes, given the difficulties we had. Please, I feel bad putting people on the spot if you can't do that. Okay, great. And for those of you in the audience, those of you who can stay an extra 10 minutes, I hope you'll agree this has been an exciting and insightful conversation that it's worth extending a little bit. So, Congresswoman, the last things you were saying there about all of us, I think really gets to another question we have from the audience, and I'll invite you to expand on what you've already said a little bit. But Linda asks you, and Dr. Hamilton can jump in after you if he has some thoughts on this, but what are some strategic actions, concrete actions that we who aren't legislators should be engaging in to yield real and sustainable changes to overcome structural racism and inequalities beyond things like marching and other sort of symbolic acts? And my sense is that's not to say that symbolic acts aren't important, but rather, what's next? What concrete actions can other people take to move this from protest to policy?
I think that's probably the number one question that we get. And I think we're going to have to all come together to figure out that. For me, I would tell you it starts with engagement. Second, I would tell you, in order to make change, you have to make change where changes are made. So with that, I would tell you, from where I sit, one of the most powerful things you can do is be registered to vote and get other people registered to vote. If you want people to listen to you, and we don't have to have people who are all exactly alike. I think when you look at what's happening in the country and in Congress, we have diversity. We have the most diverse Congress that we've ever had. When we were fighting for same-sex marriages, when we were fighting for interracial marriages, when we were fighting for Black people to vote, it took people to get more educated. It took people to get more engaged. It took people to vote laws in or out, or to demand that you figure out some middle ground. So I think it starts with engagement in your communities. I think it in your neighborhoods. I think you might not be making the change with police enforcement. But to Dr. Hamilton's point, it's beyond and more that. So make a change in the school that you go to. So maybe your children go to a school where they're not talking about real life events, because the teachers don't allow them to use words like racism, that they can't read certain books. So get engaged to make sure that your children are educated. See something, say something. I think it's involvement. I think it's engagement. I think it's going to be a long, painful process to move the needle as far as I would like to see it moved. I don't think you give up on legislation. I don't think you give up on some of the things we are fighting for. And I don't think you give up on protesting or writing letters or participating. Like, thank you to all of the people who are on this Zoom today. It's not an overnight process, and it's going to take all of us to figure out what the following steps should and will be. But look at the changes we're making right here in this city. Look at the number of corporate America's CEOs who are now learning the word Black for the first time. Look at the number of people who are now saying, somebody actually called and said, we have $3 million and we don't know what to do with it. That meant they probably could have had $300 million. But the fact is, people are now saying, I'm going to hire a consultant like a Dr. Hamilton, or they're saying, I've put a CEO type that's African-American in the C-suites and on the boards. I call it guilt money sometimes and guilt actions. So how do we take it from guilt to really believing in it's an investment and it's going to make a real change? So don't just get caught up that it has to be with police brutality. So part of it is looking at the wealth gap. Part of it is looking at the poverty rate. When you think of 20.8% for Black Americans compared to 11.8% overall just a year ago. So let's look at how do we end the health disparities like Black maternal mortality. We at one time had the highest infant mortality rate in the nation right here in Columbus, Ohio. We couldn't legislate that away, but we educated it in part. We put systems in place, and the numbers are better now. Same thing with the unemployment. People will boast and say, oh, this has been the best unemployment rates that we've had in the last 4 years. For some, yes, but it's been the highest for Black Americans. So let's look at how do we do workforce development? How do we do training? How do we take those occupations that were ingrained in some people's culture and now make sure that young folks, everybody's not going to go to college, everybody's not going to be a congressperson, everybody's not going to write a book. And so what we have to say is, but what can we do? What systems do we put in place that that person can live a viable life? You know, my father didn't even finish high school, and yet he taught me trigonometry because he could figure out measurements because he was a construction worker. And then it wasn't, if it were not for the military in allowing them to take GEDs much later in life, he would have never been able to move up that ladder because he couldn't walk in as a Black man and say, I have a 5th grade education, but I'm really smart, trust me. You never got to the trust me. You saw a 6'3" Black man talking about a 5th grade education. You know what happened. But he figured out, because enough people saw something and said something that affected a change, that at some point in his life, he sent 4 children to college with advanced degrees. So there is hope. I end with that story on this because that's part of my glass being half full. I have to take us from the agony to the action. And that's what I'd say to that person. We cannot just wallow in the agony. We don't forget it because it's there, but we have to go to action. And everybody's action is going to be different. The two of you aren't going to say the same action that I'm going to have as a diehard public servant and somebody that believes in the fight at the political level.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Hamilton, a few closing remarks on that question from you?
Sure. So Congresswoman Beatty highlighted a great deal throughout this webinar, the role of political power, the role of social movements, and how this current social movement is pushing our Congress right now. So that needs not be understated. FDR, when responding to a progressive movement, argued and said, make me do it. And I think that's the point. I think we need to recognize that it is our money, that it is our economy, and that it is our government, that needs to resonate with people and understand that it is ours. It is collectively ours. So we need to seize upon it. I think we need to shift from policies that attempt to manage people. A lot of this racism is grounded in a government trying to manage a surplus population, manage them with segregation, manage them with mass incarceration, manage them with police brutality. So that's immoral. We need governments to empower people, not manage people. Let us thrive, provide the resources, provide the structures so that people can thrive. I think that's the frame we need to get to. In terms of incarceration, I think that incarceration should be reserved only for those that are a threat, physical threat to society. That if there's, and frankly, even those that are a physical threat, if we empowered people more, there would be less resorting to violence in the first place. So, I'll end with 2 big points. One is a government needs to empower, not manage people. And the final thing is, it really is our government, our money, and our economy.
Well, thank you both so much. Unfortunately, we're about out of time. So I just want to say a really sincere thank you from me personally and on behalf of the audience to our fantastic guests today. Thank you also to our wonderfully engaged audience for being committed and interested in spending their time to learn about this issue. You can find more information about the Congresswoman, especially if you're a constituent, at beatty.house.gov or on Twitter at @repbeatty. You can follow Dr. Hamilton on Twitter, where he is very active at Derek Hamilton. And you can find IDEA online at democracyinstitute.osu.edu and sign up for our newsletter to stay informed about more events like this, or learn more about the excellent work and programming of the Center for Ethics and Human Values at cehv.osu.edu. Thanks again to all of you for your time, our guests, and our audience. Have a wonderful day.